PSR transfers, no transfers, wages to turnover. Can we get this player? Can January work out? Would it be summertime? How can Newcastle progress? Let's talk about it here, right here on Toon Tactics TV, folks.
Oh, brilliant from Cher. And now Murphy could take on the shot. Fabian Cher
All right. Good evening, folks. How are you all doing? Hope you are well. I hope you are doing very, very well. No matter where you're listening from, or no matter what you're doing, I hope you've had a blessed day and are having a great start to the week. And even if you're not, hopefully tonight's show will perk you up. I'm going to have a bit of an interesting one today, just because I'm going to essentially be doing. I was pondering about what does even PSR mean? What do wages and turnovers mean? And not to say that I'm an expert at all, like far from it. I'm like, this is like a fan's perspective. And I did a whole bunch of research today, just because of my mind, in terms of, like, I'm thinking about how are Newcastle strategizing? What's Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, what are the owners doing? How are they strategizing our transfer window? How are Newcastle going to progress, and what are they doing to move forward? And guys, I'm probably going to get a lot of things wrong in this, so I need you guys along with me on this ride to correct me, to show me what you guys think. What does this number mean? What does that mean? I'm not going to be going into the too many of the intricacies or whatnot. It's going to be pretty broad in terms of what I'm discussing, what I'm talking about. The main thing is, though, is to see where Newcastle are at when they say we've got headroom financially to be able to do something in January, but essentially there's a lot of boundaries. There's a lot of about what we can do. What does that mean? And what would it mean if they don't spend in January, but then go into the summer? What can they do to improve the squad? We all know, for instance, as the squad stands at this moment in time, we all know, for instance, that look, we need a right wing, or stroke right wing forward. We need a right centre back. Excuse me, a right centre back who can probably play right back as well, but right centre back primarily, the successor to Fabian Schär, and we need the goalkeeper. On top of that, though, we know that that's going to cost a lot of money. We don't have necessarily the PSR in terms of the movement financially to do that. Players have to go, players have to come in. What does that all mean? So I've tried to strategize. I try to get myself in the mind of Paul Mitchell. So I'm kind of seeing it from the mind of Paul Mitchell and the owners, especially. That's why I got Paul Mitchell and the owners, and Eddie Howe as well. Obviously here, the three amigos. But I'm going to try and piece it together, what it actually means. How does it actually work? And kind of formulate it and see what we can do going forward. So guys, I'm going to need you this evening. Make sure, please, to like, share, and subscribe, to kind of show what it all means, how we're going to progress forward, what can we do, and that's what it's about essentially today. So look, you guys can see before you're already here, Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, and Yasser Al-Rahman. Obviously, Paul Mitchell presents the first team, the first team coach. Obviously, he's with the players. He knows what his kind of view is on what's in the first team. What can I do to improve the first team? Paul Mitchell's obviously there on the kind of the sports development side of things, and he's looking for the overall interests of the club in terms of how the club is looking, not just now, but 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now. And obviously, Yasser Al-Rahman, he's overseeing it overall, and he has the vision for where he wants the club to be. And from what we remember, Yasser Al-Rahman's vision for the club is to be what? Is to be number one, and number one in all aspects. So the way I've kind of divided it is, and to understand PSR, to understand wages to turnover, to understand revenue. I'm not going to be, like I said, I'm not going to do I'm not going to be definitions of all these things. I'm just trying to have a broad understanding, a very, very broad fans. I'm a fan perspective. Like I try to just put it in a way where I can understand it, or I think I understand it. So we'll see where it goes and kind of try and see how they see it. How are they piecing it together? What is it? What is it they're trying to do? What is it? What are the challenges and obstacles in doing all these things? So essentially, I've boiled it down to three things, and I've used obviously a lot of AI, a lot of information on the internet, and little facts, and kind of put them together. Hopefully, I've got some kind of a rough idea where we are. So essentially, I've divided it into three things. I've divided it into looking at the 105, the cap, the PSR, understanding the 105 million cap, and where Newcastle are likely to be in that. Like, where are we at the 105 million mark? Are we at the 10 million mark? Where are we? I think I've kind of boiled it down to that by this summer, or by the end of the summer, Newcastle will probably be around the 60 to 70 million mark from the 105 million cap. And you're thinking, where did you get that? How did you understand that? I'm going to talk about it. Then there's the wages to turnover ratio, and this is more to do with the UEFA's rules, the new squad rules that are going to be coming in 25, 26. So Eddie Howe's been talking about it. Paul Mitchell's been talking about it. The owners have been talking about it. What does it mean? And essentially, it's talking about how essentially that it means that that club spending on wages and transfers. So it's it's a new squad rules which apply from 2025 season will limit club spending on wages, transfers, and agent fees to 70% of revenue. So, for instance, Newcastle, as of 23-24, I think it was, or 2023, we'll see, where, for instance, our overall revenue was 250 million. And so, like, 70% of that is roughly 180 to 190 million. So Newcastle can, according to the UEFA's rules, can only put out a squad, can only have that altogether fits under the 180, 190 million, which includes all their wages, their transfer fees and agent fees and everything else. So that's what it's all got to come under, which is interesting because the PSR talks about managing the finances that are for player sales. So it's quite different: increased revenue and controlled spending and strategies to ensure compliance. So we're going to talk about that. And the UEFA is around the actual the wages, player wages and transfer fees and things like that. So it's quite, they cover different areas of finances. Supposedly they're all there to kind of make sure that clubs are sustainable. I've come to the conclusion, I think many of us already have come to the conclusion that that for me and for many other people is there to just hold back clubs, ambitious clubs like Newcastle, like Brighton, like Nottingham Forest, and clubs around, even in Europe or whatnot, that trying to challenge, trying to be the teams that win trophies and leagues or whatnot, that's holding us back. But the rules are the rules, and we've got to know how to play by the rules. Big up, Preach. Good to see you, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining me this evening. I hope all is well. And recent birthday, man. So again, blessings and favor upon you, sir. Hope all is well, and hope you had a great birthday. And final thing we're going to be talking about is the total revenue. So the total revenue obviously is the money that the club is earning, and it covers no matter whether it's the current rules on the PSR or the new rules that are going to be coming under the UEFA. Revenue matters in all these aspects, and it can essentially alleviate or improve any of the constraints and burdens a club has, no matter what it is. So if Newcastle United are consistently in the Champions League or European competitions, particularly the Champions League, because there's more TV revenue from that, that covers a host of problems that we get from being constrained by PSR and in the future around the UEFA rules. So total revenue is revenue is what we're going to be is going to be the main thing. How the club makes money and making sure that it does make money. So let's kick it off. PSR. Just in the kind of nutshell that I understand it in. Not I know that there's amazing experts like Kieran Maguire and Swiss Ramble, and I really Swiss Ramble, and I encourage you guys to read these things, and if you want to catch up on it, I just try to break it down in my mind as to what I understand it to be, and how it reflects on what I think is happening to Newcastle. So essentially, an example of PSR for me would be like, say Newcastle signed a player for 60 million. I got Mark Gahey there. We talked about him over the summer for a 4-year contract. That 60 million is amortized, so broken down in that 4-year contract. So 15 million per year. So the club's books reflect a 15 million pound expense. So you're not going to see the 60 million in that first year. You're going to see the 15 million. That's how it's amortized across that contract, essentially. I think most people get that, to be honest. And obviously, the second year of that contract, another 50 million is expensed, leaving, for instance, so 60 million contract in the second year, leaving 30 million on the books on the value of the player. So if the player, for instance, is sold on the third year, if the player is sold for 40 million on that third year, the club would recognize a profit of 10 million remaining on the book value. Yeah, so you've bought him literally 2 years ago for 60 million, amortized it over the 4-year period, 50 million, 15 million, 50 million. In the first year, you took off 50 million. Second year, you took off another 50 million, leaving 30 million. And if you're lucky, the player's value has gone up. You managed to sell him for, well, not gone up, but it's remained, or you've managed to sell the player for more than what was left in terms of his contract, in terms of what was left on the amortized contract. You've sold him for 40 million, which means that the 30 million that's left, we've made a 10 million pound profit. And this is important because we have to understand, or I have to understand, what the roll-on or amortization period is, that is crucial for clubs to navigate regulations while pursuing their sporting ambition. So remember, obviously, this year, this summer gone, in this June, we had that whole madness with where we're 70 million pounds over the 105 million pound threshold with like 2 or 3 days to go. We're trying to sell Anthony Gordon to make sure that we're not getting sanctioned, and we end up selling Elliot Anderson, which was pure profit because it's an academy player. We're going to talk about what that means, and Yankuba Minte. So why did we end up doing it? It's because we were over the 105 million pound threshold, and we needed to bring it down. So what is pure profit? So for instance, Elliot Anderson is our academy player. We never had to buy him, like it says here, for instance, for 60 million. He is a product of our academy. So whatever we sell him for, he starts from zero. So whatever we sold him for, which was 35 million, is pure profit. There's no amortized cost or fee or anything else. And that, for instance, would take off the money from the transfer fee. So if we were 70 million pound over the threshold, and we was able to put that money, the 30 million, into our profit, into our club's profit, which meant that the threshold, which we were over by, was raised even, which was our profit and our revenue. Our revenue grew higher, and therefore whatever we went over by, the 70 million, had reduced as well significantly because he's an academy player. So we ended up finally getting into that, obviously not getting sanctioned and making sure that, boy, we're not over the top of the threshold. And so that's where we're at. And if you don't get it at this point, don't worry. I'm with you. I'm going to work it through as well with you. So we're going to go back to that point as well in terms of the 155 million and the threshold and what it actually all means. I've got a few comments in here. Guys, do ask questions along the way because I'm trying to make sense of it, and it'll be good to know what you guys think as well. Late to the show and watch from the beginning, Phil. David Veitch, good to see you, sir. Good evening. I hope all is well. Big preach. That's the reason why Edwards doesn't give out wild contracts. Well, exactly. And I know that, for instance, there's a big conversation amongst Liverpool fans about Mohamed Salah's contract and what he's demanding and stuff, isn't it? And if I know he's an incredible player, a legendary player, and other players as well in your team, but if your wages are so, if you meet the 300k a week or 500k a week they want, it's going to really, really damage Liverpool going forward. So no, yeah, Edwards has been very, very smart, very, very smart. And in fact, Paul Mitchell referenced Liverpool's dealings in the transfer market in terms of like kind of being the flagship of terms of how to approach the transfer and have a transfer strategy. And I think Newcastle are trying to follow a similar thing. So that was the example of one player. Now imagine multiple players of where Newcastle are right, and this goes to the point of the £105 million threshold. So, for instance, based on the available information, discussions around Newcastle United's financial situation, particularly focusing on the amortization bit. So I've taken, for example, Alexander Isak, Bruno Gomes. I took a bit of Yankuba Minte, obviously got sold later on, and Anthony Gordon, some of our kind of most high-profile signings and players and what that means for us. So, for instance, Alexander Isak, we've purchased him for 62 million. We still owe on some of that 62 million to Real Sociedad. So and his price was amortized over what would be like around, was also amortized over his contract. So AI kind of taken when he was bought to where he is now, when his contract lived, AI was able to kind of quantify that, look, there's about 42.5 million left over his contract term. If so, say for instance his contract is 5 years, there's about 42.5 million for Newcastle left to pay. So this is like what? It's like second and a bit year. There's about 42.5 million pounds left, and that's gonna go into the transfer into that threshold that we're trying to pay off as well. Bruno Gomes bought for 42 million pounds. There's with 20% still owed to Leon. So his current book value, the value that's left, is around 21.8 million as well. So bought him for 42. Again, if it's a 5-year contract, it's about what 7-8 million a year, something like that would appear in terms of what we're paying. So Bruno Gomes obviously has been here since the takeover, so about 3.5 years. So by this summer or whatnot, or at this point in time, at this point in time, we've got about 21.8 million. Similar, Anthony Gordon, there's about 29.5 million left on him to pay. Yankuba Minte, had he still been here, would have we bought him for a very little amount of money, which is obviously roughly around 6-7 million pounds. If he was still here, Yankuba Minte, we would have had about 4.9 million left to pay on him. Now we know that we've sold him for roughly 35 million to Brighton after 1 year. So if you take away 4.9 million from 35 million, which is the overall free, we made a profit of 30 million pounds on Yankuba Minte, and that was the money that was taken off the books for Newcastle United. So taking these, for example, Isak, Bruno, Gordon, Minte, if you total up these players alone in terms of what's left to pay for Newcastle and how it would appear on the books, the total of these players is 98.7 million. So given the statement that the rolling book value is over 100 million and growing, so the money that we owe for players. So when I asked AI to kind of estimate how much do Newcastle still owe other teams in terms of paying on the books, in terms of paying for their transfers, is somewhere in the region of 120 to 150 million pounds, which is a lot, and it's only growing because Newcastle are buying more and more players. So 150 million pounds, obviously. So that's a lot of money, and what essentially offsets that. Got a couple questions there. Oh, one comment there from Preach, Big Preach. Facts. Yeah. So Edwards is very, very smart in terms of how he does dealings. So what I had to learn was, I thought to myself, okay, 120 million pounds to 150 million pounds. Does that mean that we're over does that mean that we were like, that means when we were over the 100 and that means we're over the the 105 million pound threshold. And I think this is what Darren Eels was talking about when that summer that's just gone, that Newcastle was 70 million pound over. We still had chunks of those on the books in terms of being able to pay for it, that was left to pay for us to do. So what did that mean? But at the same time, so that meant that's why we had to sell Yankuba Minte for a profit, and that's why we had to sell Elliot Anderson, an academy player, for that profit, in order to be able to make, to be able to ensure that we didn't get sanctioned. I'm still trying to understand it, but essentially, that's where it's at. So if one player is if a player is bought for 60 million, his contract is 4 years, it's split 15 million per every year to make 60 million. Now, after 2 years, you've paid off 30 million of that, so there's 30 million left. If you manage to sell him for 40 million, you make 10 million pound profit. If you've got multiple players that are for 60, for instance, 4 players for 60 million, after 2 years on 4-year contracts on all those players, essentially you'll have 120 million pounds left to pay on those players. If you're fortunate enough to sell all those players for 40 million, you'll end up paying off the 120 million, the money that's left over, and make a profit. Newcastle, as we know, were not making any profit because they weren't selling any players at all. So Newcastle ended up having to sell, in the real life example, we had to sell Elliot Anderson and Yankuba Minte in order to make that profit. Man, that is crazy. trying to understand this and where the owners and where Newcastle are coming from. The other thing that is important to remember about this is, and this is the part maybe where I got a 60 million pound from. This is Phillips mathematics. This is Phillips mathematics. So essentially, there's a 3-year roll-on period. So this is when they're talking about essentially, after every 3 years, 1, 2, 3 years, the first year after that period is concluded, and hopefully you will meet the 105 million pound threshold. So we're within that 100 million pound loss of a threshold. The first year is taken away. So, for instance, in Newcastle's case, and it started again. So what does that mean? So in Newcastle's case, in the period of 2021, 2022, let me make sure you guys can see this actually on my screen. I might have to zoom in onto it a little bit. Yeah, I might do. Let me see actually. Yeah, I'll zoom in onto it so you guys can see a little bit more. All right, so Newcastle's losses for 21-22 was 73 million, which falls out of the 3-year cycle by June 2024. So remember, after the 3-year cycle, it starts again, or it not starts again, but that particular year is paid for, is falling away, and we it will go into a new year again, a new cycle of 3 years. So what that means is the losses of 21-22, 73 million. The loss of 22-23 was 70. Sorry, the first one was 73 million. This 22-23 was 70 million, and the projected year, which is the one that's just gone, 23-24, is around a £24 million profit based on discussions and posts on X. So that means the sales of Yakumba Minte and Elliot Anderson not only paid off what was left for Newcastle to pay in terms of the debts around for the transfers themselves, but it also put us in a profit situation. So what that means is when people are looking at the revenue for uh, for Newcastle in 20, and also added to that is the revenue that Newcastle made from the European competition, the Champions League. So that made it 24. So added to that, Newcastle made a £24 million profit in the year of 23 and 24. So losses in 21-22 of 73 million, losses of 70 million in 22-23, and a profit in the year 23-24. So what does that mean? What that means is when they're doing the calculations for this for 24-25, what they're going to do is that 21-22 period, because it can only do it in 3-year cycles. It can't do it'll be going into the ECL it'll be 4 years. So if it's in the 3-year cycles, that 21-22 period, which is now paid for, it drops out of the cycle. So when they're calculating the £105 million threshold in terms of losses, the year 21-22 is now taken away. So 73 million is taken away. What is left is 22-23 season, which is 70 million pounds, and of losses, and 23-24 season, which is a 24 million pound of profit. So it means that in this current moment, without us knowing obviously what the 24-25 period is, which is now, because we don't know what it is just yet, the net loss over 2 years, which is 21-22 plus 22-23 season, sorry, the 22-23 and 23-24 season. So the 2 years, the net loss over the 2 years is 70 million minus the 24 million pound profit that we made, which means that overall, over the last 2 year seasons, where over the last 2 seasons, Newcastle have got a 46 million pound deficit or loss. So we're well within within the 2 year period. We're well within the 105 million pound threshold. So essentially, we've got 66 million. We're within 66 million pounds of the 105 million pound threshold. If you guys get it, I hope you know where we're at. Now that seems like a lot of money, because essentially you're thinking that we can spend more and more money, but the problem is obviously we've still got the owners, Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, but the owners, Paul Mitchell in particular, are thinking 3, 4, 5 years ahead. And so that's not a lot of headroom. When they say they've got limited headroom, they've got this January period. They can't blow all that money in January, because if they blow all that money that they've got in January, they've got nothing to spend in the summer. They've got nothing to spend, obviously, in the following year as well. So the projections into this year, 24-25, which is 24-25, which will be now the third year this year. The projections for this year is, this is where we estimate. This is where we're assuming. So say the losses. So assuming that we manage our expenses better this year with a new revenue stream, so that we're expected to have. So maybe Newcastle make it to the Champions League, new sponsorship deals. They, being the owners, might aim for a break even or small losses in terms of obviously cost and revenue. So conservatively estimate another £20 million loss due to continued investment in the squad and infrastructure. So if you can imagine the £46 million current threshold of current loss that we've got, plus the 20 million, this is what we're estimating, plus the 20 million in losses from 24-25 would mean that Newcastle are now 66 million into the losses, into the 105 million pound threshold. and that's in this summer alone. So if you can imagine for instance, next 2 summers or whatnot, we've got like 39 million pounds left to play with. That's like 4 transfer windows. So that's how they're calculating it. Oh, I've gone off it. I've gone off it again. So let me go down just a little bit. I keep going off it. It's annoying. Where are you? And if you got questions, man, I just need to do let me know. This is just something. This is what was on my mind. So, yeah. So in that estimate of the year that's gone, essentially, if Newcastle do better in terms of buying players, selling players, and we're going to talk about that further. um, Maybe the aim that the owners have, and part of the reason why they're not spending in this January, or they're kind of being quoted as they're unlikely to spend this January, is because they want to be able to leave as much room as possible, to have enough space, enough room as possible within that 105 million pound um, threshold that we're allowed in terms of losing. They know that there's also going to be they probably also want to wait to see if Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, or what European competition they're going to qualify for, before they also make a final decision on sponsorship deals. So, for instance, Adidas. Say Adidas okay, Newcastle, if you guys get into the Europa Conference League, we're only going to give you 5 million. If you get into the Champions League, we're going to give you 20 million, right? So there's a big difference. So that's how the owners are trying to are trying to guesstimate and plan for what they're going to do. So if Newcastle get into the Champions League and Adidas give them 20 million in sponsorship deals, that changes their perspective on what players they can buy and what the players they can't buy. But if the owners don't wait, are impulsive, for instance, in the transfer window, and buy players over the kind of the higher fees. For instance, a player that might be worth 30 million in the summer, and we buy him for 50 million in the transfer window, and we end up going to the Conference League, well, then we've lost. We're already in a deficit, and that 60 million pound threshold that I was talking about, which is a conservative estimate, now goes into 80 or 90 million pounds. And that eats into the next transfer window, next January, next summer window. And that hurts Newcastle. Not only that, though, it also hurts in terms of our wage to turnover ratio, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Aaron Cave, good to see you, sir. Hello, Philip. Hope you are well. I am very, very well. I need everybody's help to help me with this transfer windows or transfer, but working out what PSR and ratio means and stuff like that. It's not necessarily kind of going too deep into that. I'm just trying to strategize, trying to understand what it all means, and trying to see where Newcastle are at. And essentially, where I think it's pointing towards is that we know that Newcastle haven't spent, for instance, money in the last 2 transfer windows. The previous January, we didn't spend any money. This summer, where we only bought Osola for 15, well, we bought Osola and we bought Vlade Carmos for 20 million. That was a PSR deal, but we sold Elliot Anderson, Yakumba Minte, plus we made money from the revenue generated from the Champions League and other places, which essentially meant that for 23-24 season, we made a profit of 24 million, and in the previous 2 seasons, we made the loss of 70 million and 73 million. So so essentially we passed that we passed the 105 million pound threshold. Now we've moved into a new cycle. The owners, Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell, have got together and said, hey, we can't have a summer that we just had previously, where we just scraped through, and we've left ourselves with little to no room in terms of being able to move forward and buy players if we wanted to. We're lucky, very lucky, to not have that. So now we have to learn from our mistakes. And when Newcastle are at, is they're trying to make sure that, okay, we could, if we're gonna buy, if we've got this amount of, when they're talking about headroom, I think the owners have roughly around, they're about 49 million pounds currently into the 105 million pound loss of the threshold. This is just Philip's estimate. These are just my estimates. I haven't got the accountancy books. Kieran Maguire or Swiss Ramble haven't sat down and said this to me. This is just my estimates and AI's estimates and kind of putting it together. So when they're looking into this window, part of the reason why I think they're reluctant to spend money in this window is, well, partly A, the team's doing well and the squad, and you've got players coming back fit. Kraft, for instance, Botman and others, and they're doing well in the league. So they're also but they're also the transfer window itself. January transfer window is a seller's market, and they don't have to pay £50 million for a player now that they could have paid £30 million for in the summer, and they don't want to damage that, the kind of the financial headroom they currently got, in terms of going into the summer, because if they spend this money now, it hurts how much money they can spend in the summer. So obviously we talked about kind of considering the player sales. We've also got players to sell, and that's what they're trying to do in this window. They're trying to sell players as well. We're going to talk about that in terms of what players they're going to sell, what that's going to mean as well. So if Newcastle makes significant sales, if they sell Lloyd Kelly, for instance, who again, they're on the books, he comes up as zero in terms of transfer fees, or very close to zero in terms of transfer fees, and he'll be close enough to kind of pure sales, pure profit from the money that's made on him. We've also got obviously other players that we're trying to sell, Miguel Almiron as well, and others who we're going to try and again take that money into our overall revenue, and also so increase our revenue, and also leave ourselves more room in terms of that kind of 105 million pound threshold, and reduce it even more. So we've got more headroom going into the summer. So conclusion is, at this point in stages, Newcastle are likely to have about, in my opinion, this is Philip's opinion, are likely to have about 39 million pound below, as it stands. They're about 39 million pound below the 105 million pound PSR cap, as it stands, in my opinion, for the 3-year cycle that ended in June 2025. So this summer, based on these kind of very conservative estimates, which don't include sponsorship deals, profits made on players. So if Lloyd Kelly gets sold today for 25 million, that changes. If Miguel Almiron gets sold today for 10, 50 million, that changes. Longstaff, for instance, has been mentioned as well, that changes. So all of these can change. So, and as well as unexpected expenses. If a player gets injured, God forbid, we might have to, maybe a higher profile player, we might have to get somebody in, and say, for instance, if Shaw gets injured and Kraft get injured, isn't fit, we need a right centre back now, we might have to pay that 50 million for Mark Gahey and get him in now. So that changes that again changes everything in terms of our threshold and where we're at. So that's why this January is such a they have to be strategic. So Newcastle's financial strategy is including player sales, contract negotiations. So you've seen players also kind of get new deals, get renewed. We had about 11 players going into the summer now who had needed their contract renewed or not renewed. So we've renewed Byrne, we've renewed Kraft, and Fabian Schär's, and there's some players that we haven't renewed as well. So this is all very, very speculative from my point of view, and just learning this is what is like Newcastle are trying to move they have to be very, very strategic, like a very, very surgical in terms of the players they might bring in or not. Got one question here from Aaron Kainth. Let me drink some water before I proceed. All right. Surely, this is Aaron Kainth. Surely, with the sale of Miggy and potentially moving on a Kelly, Target or Longstaff will lead to incomings. It feels negligent to go 3 windows without a major signing, in all honesty. I'm going to even talk about that further, but yes, I think, and this is Eddie Howe's argument, and You weren't here earlier, Aaron, but I was talking earlier about how essentially I'm going to be talking from the perspective of Paul Mitchell, Yasser Aramayan, and Eddie Howe as well. But at the moment, I'm kind of like I'm probably more focusing from the perspective of Paul Mitchell and Yasser Aramayan in terms of trying to balance those books. And it's not to say that those guys don't want to succeed on the field. Obviously, they do. But it's trying to, I think, from their perspective, they're trying to leave as much financial headroom for them into the summer. I think ideally, what these guys are banking on or having to take a risk on, really trying to take a risk on, is as it stands, as the squad stands now, we've got players coming back from injury, i.e., Botman, Kraft, Lascelles, Callum Wilson, Barnes will come back in mid-February. So I think they're kind of guesstimating where, okay, if we sell Longstaff, if we sell Lloyd Kelly, I don't think they anticipate to sell Kelly, but if we were to sell Kelly, a straight up profit. Miggy, I think it was Miggy and I forgot the other gentleman that were going to sell. Miggy and somebody else that were going to sell, and but the Lloyd Kelly came out of surprise. But Miggy, Lloyd Kelly, um, maybe even Longstaff allows them to have even more headroom, financial headroom, going into the summer. Eddie Howe and the fans like us are saying, "Hey, we're leaving a mad gap in that squad, and we're risking not getting into the Champions League, not getting into Europe if we don't find a replacement." I think it's the same thing. I think Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, and Yasser Aramayan will all have that in their minds as well. But they don't want that. But it's like it's a very careful balancing act as well. I think that's why some of the deals they're trying to get is like a loan with an obligation to buy. Because if they're able to loan a player beyond the June deadline and pay into the next cycle, that helps them deal with this current cycle, and that leaves them with headroom on that financial headroom to buy the players that they want to buy for the price they want to buy in the summer as well. But opposition teams aren't obligated to do Newcastle any favors. And Eddie Howe talked about that, how essentially clubs, especially in the Premier League, do not want to give Newcastle any favors either. I'm going to continue, but just before that, I got Geordie Z. Good to see you, sir. I hope you're well. Many clubs are struggling with the PSR. Exactly. Man United, for instance, if you hear the rivals talking, Man United are struggling with it. Big Preach, who's a Liverpool fan, not necessarily Liverpool are struggling with it, but they've got players, big players, Mohamed Salah, Trent Alexander, who want massive wages, but that's going to hurt their PSR. So every team is kind of struggling with it in terms of that. But yeah, so many clubs are struggling with PSR, according to Geordie Z. Do you think the lack of transfers is detrimental to the Premier League as a business? I think it will be, especially when you've got less kind of activity going on. And I think the Premier League will know that. We'll see that. But also from the Premier League, I think from the Premier League's perspective is, and it depends who you talk to. From my perspective, and if you ask, for instance, Kieran Maguire, the financial expert who knows the stuff way better, like just knows the stuff amazingly, his perspective is that PSR was designed to stop clubs like Newcastle, Aston Villa, and others from progressing. So this is all by design. If that's the case, for instance, and I think it is the case, the unintended consequence is what you're saying, Jordy. See exactly that. There's a whole lack of transfer activity right now. Man United are struggling. Chelsea aren't struggling necessarily, but it's clubs are having to do some crazy deals in order to kind of get over the PSR threshold. But January transfer windows are madly slow anyway. So I think it's having the ripple effect in short, but we can't tell how much an effect just yet. Just yet, we can't tell because, for instance, Man City have just spent £250 million, which is already more than the entire last year's transfer window in January. So we don't quite know yet, Geordie Z. I think it will, but we don't quite know yet, essentially, if there will be an impact. Because also, a lot of transfer fees are overinflated anyway. So, for instance, the whole Mark Gahey saga that we had, Crystal Palace allegedly wanted us to pay £70 million for him. Van Dijk was bought for £75 million. Mark Gahey is not Van Dijk. Mark Gahey is Mark Gahey, meaning that he's a 35 to £40 million defender. So with if and this is where if clubs if businesses slow down as a result of PSR, where clubs are saying, look, we can't pay these inflated prices anymore because of PSR. Now it's going to take consensus between all these clubs, or it's just going to take a realization, whether it comes now or it comes later, where, for instance, Crystal Palace now beginning to realize, hey, we should have never told Newcastle to pay £70 million in the summer and should have taken the £50 million they're offering. Because now they're in a situation with Chelsea, where Chelsea want Mark Gahey, and Chelsea are ultra aggressive in the transfer window. So they've recalled Chalobah, who was on loan to Crystal Palace. They didn't need to do that. They recalled Chalobah and now saying Chalobah's worth £40 million. So Crystal Palace really want Chalobah, and Chelsea is saying, you want Chalobah, £40 million, and we'll pay maybe 5-10 million. I assume they're saying we'll pay you 5-10 million maybe for Mark Gahey. Crystal Palace are now in a situation where I bet they wish they sold Mark Gahey for £50 million. And I think if we turn things around for Newcastle are now looking for these type of deals in the summer. And maybe even Mark Gahey still goes to Newcastle because we're actually offering straight up cash. But then Crystal Palace are left with no defenders at all. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But if you see what I'm saying, so it's like a two-edged sword with PSR at the moment. It's slowing down business and there's less transfer activity, and it could hurt the Premier League. At the same time, it's stopping owners like Parish from selling players for overinflated prices as well. That's how it's kind of been. Is the early stages of it, the very kind of embryonic stages of all this kind of thing. That's like in these small little examples. That's how things are kind of panning out. But at the same time, Man City just bought Kusano for £40 million. We were rumored to be in front for about £20-25 million. So it depends on what club and what transfer window. So I think we just have to see how it goes, essentially. But great question there. Now, Aaron, I'm going to go do one more question for Aaron before I move on. Aaron Kane, if the Premier League have ruined their product with PSR, the only way around this for us is for a new stadium to generate revenue. We're going to talk about that as well, Aaron, around revenue. So rolling on value. So essentially, as I spoke about earlier on, in regards to Newcastle, some of the players that we are looking that whose contracts are running out this summer: Callum Wilson, Martin Dubravka, Jamal Lewis, Mark Gillespie, like their total transfer value, like in terms of fees, is minimal. That's why, for instance, it made no sense. Like Newcastle decided not to sell Dubravka because they weren't going to make any money on him at all. And it was better to keep him because obviously Pope was out and Dubravka was in good form. So it made no sense. However, where Newcastle could make headroom is in the wages. So if you look at the combined, if you look at the we'll go into so that like the total potential savings. So in terms of the fees, like in terms of Wilson's so if we look at let me forward with the wages. So if you look at Wilson's cut and Ruddy's and Dubravka's and Lewis's and Gillespie's wages, like this is over the year. Wilson's on about 2.34 million, Ruddy on about 5K, Dubravka on around 2 million, which is probably a little bit higher now because we've improved his contract. Lewis is on 2.3, and Gillespie is on $500,000. If you put these together, in terms of annual wages, £7.8 million, 7.8 million in terms of the wages, which um, which will allow us to save money in wages. Now, why is the wage part so important? So, as I mentioned, there's going to be new UEFA rules coming in 25-26 season, which is going right back up to the top. And this is the UEFA rule. So UEFA are essentially saying UEFA's new squad cost rules, which will apply from 25-26 season, will limit club spending on wages. So on wages, transfers, and agent fees. So where you can only spend will limit club spending on wages and transfers and agent fees to 70% of revenue. So if you take Newcastle's revenue 23-24 season, going back to this, so Newcastle's current wage bill from 22-23 season was around 187 million pounds. It's probably a little bit higher now, maybe even considerably higher now. Taking away 7.8 million from the players that you just mentioned, even taking that money off from the 187 million, Newcastle will have 179.2 million, which would still put us a little bit over that 70 million percent mark. So Newcastle's current, 22-23 season, Newcastle's wage to turnover ratio was reported at 94%. So nearly 100% of our revenue of our weight is on wages, with a revenue of 250 million pounds. So the ideal scenario under the UEFA's rules would be to keep that below 70%. So reducing the wage bill to 179.2 million would adjust the wage to turnover ratio to around 71.6%. So if with Wilson going, Ruddy going, Dubravka going, Lewis going, Gillespie going, we're still over by 71% according to UEFA, which is still above the 70% threshold. And as you said, for instance, Aaron, to combat that, Newcastle need to increase their revenue, or, as said here, you don't renew the contracts of Wilson and the players like that, and as well as obviously sell on players as well. Ideally, I think you want to increase your revenue. So Newcastle have to balance two things: the PSR, which is more around the transfers and kind of transfer fees. We talked about transfer fees of wages, and then you've got the UEFA wage to turnover impact, which is again talking about which takes in wages, transfer fees of transfer fees and agent fees for clubs as well. So UEFA are basically saying if Newcastle were in the Champions League in 22-23, they essentially wouldn't be able to compete because our wages were significantly higher than 70%. So Newcastle need to either grow their revenue or not, or again, not renew contracts and sell players on. So Newcastle have two things when Yasser Al-Rumayyan and Paul Mitchell sit down with Eddie Howe, they're explaining these two things that they're having to battle. So when Eddie Howe is saying, I don't want to sell Longstaff, I don't want to sell Lloyd Kelly, I don't want to sell Barnes, for instance, which makes sense because if we were going to get into Europe, the other side of the argument is we might not even be able to compete in Europe because our wages are way higher than what the rules are allowing us to be. So it's mad. I think again we talked about. I think Aaron mentioned revenue. The thing that changes all of this, or at least helps with all of this, is essentially Newcastle increasing the revenue as well. But speaking of, I spoke about Longstaff, I spoke about Barnes, and I spoke about Kieran Trippier. Just at the end of that, because essentially these type of players, or players of this and I'm not talking about their playing ability at all. I'm talking about I'm talking about them in two instances, which is selling them from a Newcastle perspective will help us in the PSR as well as helping us in the wage to turnover ratio as well. So, and again, I know people would say, and I'm saying this as well, I know people would say, but hold on, it takes away our depth, it takes away our experience, which are all qualities. And this is what Eddie Howe will be saying, this is what the fans will be saying. For now, I'm just trying to explain it how it would work in terms of PSR and the wage to turnover ratio as well, and why I think these players are increasingly being talked about in the Athletic, some tier one journalists as well in the Athletic, um, uh, and a kind of other in the I newspaper as well, and by especially around and other kind of journalists who are kind of who are correspondents in Newcastle. So the likes of Kieran Trippier, who's on high wages as well, his contract runs out in 2026. He can still, so he's on about 150k. You take that off our wages, that's a considerable amount. Plus, it can get 10 to 12 million, maybe 10 to 15 million for him currently. So that's PSR and the wage turnover taken off as well. Barnes, who I think is between 80 to 120k in terms of wages, we can probably sell him for about 25 to 35 million as well. Again, that answers the PSR and that answers the wage to transfer ratio as well. Similar to Sean Longstaff, who's a Newcastle United academy boy, from the PS, if we sell him on for 20, 25 million, that is pure profit. And again, gives us even more and more headroom in terms of the PSR situation. And I can't remember how much he's on wages. I think it's between 50 to 70k as well. That is very, very again, that deals with the PSR situation. So even if you just look at it from a revenue impact side, the combined cost of these three players is between 45 to 60 million pounds. From selling Harvey Barnes, Kieran Trippier, and Longstaff, Newcastle can make around 45 to 60 million pounds in terms of revenue from sales. And the profit, remember, you're going to get pure profit from Longstaff. We didn't buy Longstaff for 10 million, for instance, and sell him for 20 million, therefore making 10 million profit. He's an academy boy. So if we sell him for 25 million, for instance, it's 25 million pound profit. So the profit that we can make on these guys could be 50 to 65 million, significantly reducing our PSR. Like selling these three, for instance, would pretty much set the timer back on our PSR. Where we're almost like back in the when the takeover first happened. Like that's how significant it is, I think. And also, and the other aspect, the wages to turnover. So the current wage bill from 22-23 season, again, I think it's higher now because we renewed Bruno's contract, we renewed lots of players. But say we took 22-23 wages, 187 million. The wages savings from these three players, the combined wage that would save them for, which is 13 million annually. So that would mean the new ratio from this will be from 62.33%. That is obviously if we get a projected revenue of 300 million in this year. If we get 300 million this year, it would also improve that by to 58%. So we would reduce it even more to 58% within UEFA. So that is significant in terms of just wage to turnover and PSR. I know it, and I'm just keeping, and what people are, and what we're all saying as fans, and Eddie Howe is, like I said, their ability, their skills, their experience, their depth, what they mean to the squad, what they mean to the club. That is, I'm just going to park that to one side just for 1 minute to explain how this part, and this is what Eddie Howe is talking about, how business knowledge is having too much say over actual football knowledge. I think it was football knowledge, something like that. So you've got those two heads that are clashing. But if you just see it from that perspective of trying to play within the rules, of trying to get the most that we can out of the transfer window, from the wage to turnover perspective and the PSR perspective, just selling these three players would have a significant impact on Newcastle United in terms of the transfer in terms of where the transfer, how we're able to move in the transfer window. Got one question here from Aaron Kane. Let me just get a drink of water here. Aaron Kane, question, Philip. With this talk about us needing to increase revenue, yes, I'm about to get onto that as well, to compete and sponsorships, yeah. Do you think the club are awaiting the City case details before going all in on sponsorships? I think they're waiting on. I think this is what we're talking about. This is why the thumbnail title is around. Is Piff getting his ducks in a row? I think that's exactly that, Aaron. But also, I don't think he was here when I was saying it. But also, say with the sponsorship deals, an example, Adidas, Newcastle, Adidas are saying, for instance, Newcastle, if you guys get into the Conference League, for instance, we'll pay you an extra 5 million from our sponsorship deals. That's 5 million. Or if not even, yes, it's 5 million. But if you get into the Champions League, we'll give you 20 million. So part of the reason why they're question we've talked about. So part of the reason why they're waiting for a number of things. They're waiting for, yes, they're waiting to see where the City case details are, but also they might also be waiting in terms of where to see where they land in terms of the league itself. So how much money they're getting as well. Let me just read the question again to make sure I'm answering it, Aaron. Question, Philip, will this talk about us needing to increase revenue to compete in sponsorships? Do you think the club are waiting for that? Yeah, so there is the City case, but there's also in terms of where do Newcastle land in terms of Europe. If they finish in the Champions League, it changes a lot of things in terms of how they approach the transfer window, the players they can attract, and the contract renewals. Because now when they sit down with, for instance, Alexander Isak, they have a different conversation with Alexander Isak about what they can do. Or they sit down with Bruno Gomes and they sit down with anybody else that they might have to. There'll also be bonuses and stuff like that. So I think they're waiting to see where they finish in the league. They're waiting to see, they got the CEO that's waiting to arrive. They're waiting to find out also in terms of are they going to build a new stadium? I think they are going to build a new stadium, but they're waiting to find out if they're going to build a new stadium or expand it. All these type of things, they're kind of waiting to see where their revenue is going. But I think if we're talking about to the medium to short term is where do Newcastle finish this year, for instance, in this league as well? And you don't want to pay, for instance, we talked about Mark Gahey. You don't want to pay £50 million now for Mark Gahey in the January transfer window and then finish in the Conference League. And that causes not only damage to your PSR, but causes damage to your wage turnover ratio as well, when you could have waited and bought him in the summer for 30 million, as what it's probably going to be sold for now, because Crystal Palace messed up, bought him for 30 million pounds. And even if you have finished in the Conference League, for instance, it's not going to do as much damage as it would have before. So I think they're just waiting for certain things to line up properly. But obviously, if a great deal comes along in the January transfer window and on a player that they want, they'll probably make some things and then they'll shift things around. So I hope that makes sense, Aaron. I think that's what they're waiting for. So, for instance, if Mark Gahey becomes available for 40 million, for instance, and he wants to come and he's available, and Crystal Palace want to sell him, I think Newcastle will shift things around in order to accommodate him and move on with the deal, for instance. So I think patience essentially is being very strategic, especially in the January transfer window, is where Newcastle are at. But I think the ideal scenario, the scenario where the sky is blue, the sun is shining, and there's rainbows, is Newcastle. They keep their powder dry. They sell who they need to sell. They make a profit, 20 to 30 million pounds, for instance, in this January transfer window. So they take off their wages. They also increase the headroom, the financial headroom they have in the PSR. They finish in the Champions League with the squad that they have, and they go into the summer now saying, well, we can really do something. So I think that's the kind of ideal scenario that they want to have, Aaron. I hope I've answered that. That's what I think. That's what I think anyway. I hope I've answered that. So speaking about revenue, exactly. Now that we're speaking about it, big old vote. Newcastle trying to increase that dough, trying to increase that money essentially. And I think revenue is what it alleviates a lot of these problems. So again, this is what AI was like when I was putting when we was putting on the past reports and publications and posts, and other sites have been saying. So Scramble of saying Kieran Maguire, AI kind of put it all together. And at the moment, so for the 24, based on the information provided, Newcastle United's estimated revenue for 24-25 season, so this season, is projected to surpass 300 million, which is incredible. This estimation comes from statements made by Darren Ills, the Newcastle CEO, indicating the club's revenue would set a new club record by going over 300 million for 23-24 season, with expectations of continued growth. So obviously, again, they're waiting to see what happens in this January. If they sell Lloyd Kelly, for instance, if they sell Miguel Almiron and maybe a third person and make anywhere between, I don't know, 20 to 40 million pounds, that 300 million could potentially turn into 350 million, for instance, in revenue for as and kind of continuing from that growth. Additionally, posts on X, and particularly with the new sponsorship deals and participation in Europe, which we were talking about. So if Newcastle finish in the Champions League, which supports this projection. So if Newcastle finish in the Champions League, this projection even gets even better, for instance. So revenue. And then that's when you probably see them announcing a new stadium or an expansion. Like I said, I think it's going to be a new stadium. That's when you might see, for instance, the deals that we were waiting around Aramco. So in Newcastle's current state, and kind of them having to fight it out of the Premier League in terms of them being able to get the money, then the sponsors being able to decide how much they want to be able to give rather than let the Premier League decide. That's been a shift as well. So now, whereas before, for instance, if Aramco said, I want to give Newcastle, say, for instance, 20 million per year, for instance, the Premier League would say Aramco would have to prove why they want to give 20 million. And the courts have decided now that those slight changes is where if Aramco say, hey, we want to give 20 million, and the Premier League have an issue with that, they would have to prove why it's not 20 million. So I think that's the slight shift in that, talking about kind of relating to what you're talking about there, Aaron Cave, as well. But also, if Newcastle finish in the Champions League, for instance, in the Champions League spot as well, if Aramco want to give 20 million now, there's not going to be much argument. That probably even goes up. Newcastle can say we are a Champions League team now. We're going to have more broadcasting, more eyes on us. There's a lot more to prove. So there's a lot more going for Newcastle in terms of them being able to say, hey, we are now we not entitled, but we have now earned more money from sponsors now because we are a Champions League team, as opposed to if Newcastle finish in the Conference League, where maybe saying 20 million a year from Aramco is a lot more harder to kind of justify, essentially, is what I'm saying. So they are waiting to line up their ducks. They're trying to line their ducks up, I think, as well, in my opinion. Guys, we've got about 19 folks and 20 folks keeps on up and down in here. Incredible. Please do like, share, and subscribe. That would be incredible. I'm just I'm going through this in terms of, I'm a fan. I'm no financial expert at all. I've just done some study and research. It was in my mind. I'm trying to understand PSR, wage to turnover, by talking to you, by showing what I've kind of been able to come from my research and stuff. I nearly said wages. Wages is on my mind now. So guys, do ask questions. Do let me know what you're thinking. And remember to like, share, and subscribe. So like I said, Newcastle have a number of things they need to consider in terms of going into June 2025. Obviously this summer. So they've got this UEFA squad ratio, which is going to come up. So say, for instance, Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, yeah? If Newcastle qualify for the Champions League and their wage to turnover, which is high, which is about the UEFA squad ratio limits season, clubs will be limited to spending 70% of their revenue on player wages, transfer fees, and agent fees. This will impact how much Newcastle can spend. So if Newcastle qualify for the Champions League and they made the mistake of in the January transfer window buying Mark Gavey for £50 million, buying some other right wing forward for absorbing amount of money, they leave themselves with very little room in terms of being able to play in the Champions League. They might be disqualified from even playing in the Champions League, and in order for them to actually play in the Champions League, they might have to move players they didn't want to move in order to make that happen, which is going to be even more difficult because players are going to be saying, I want to play in the Champions League. If you're Harvey Barnes, and obviously the conversation is that, he's not, players like him and Longstaff aren't too happy about the playing time they've got. They might be a little bit more flexible with that now if Newcastle are in the Champions League and might not want to move. So Newcastle have all these things to consider. Now they've got players that are going to come off the wage bill naturally. Callum Wilson, and we mentioned as well, and others, because their contracts are running out. Newcastle have got all these things in mind when they're kind of now looking at the January transfer window. And that's, like I said, the ideal business they could have is, say, for instance, like a Mark Gay comes along, Palace say 40 million, but they do a loan with an obligation to buy, so we can buy him after that June date. It helps Newcastle a lot, but then at the same time, it's still a considerable outlay in terms of fees and everything else. So yeah, there's a lot for Newcastle to think about at the moment. That's why selling Lloyd Kelly isn't out of the question. Selling maybe even Longstaff or Barnes in this transfer window isn't out of the question. Kieran Trippier isn't out of the question. It's not ideal for Eddie Howe. I know we're going to talk about Eddie Howe and the fans. We're going to talk about this in a moment. But you can see where if you're Paul Mitchell, if you're Yasser Al-Rumayyan, they want to compete. They want to get to the Champions League too. But you need money to do that as well. So they're trying to make it with the rules. Player sales and amortization periods. They have to wait for that to pass as well. Player sales and purchases, revenue streams. Like we talked about just earlier. Performance related revenue streams are going to make an impact. So if there's going to be different in sponsorship deals if Newcastle qualify for the Champions League compared to the Conference League. So they've got to wait for that. They've got to be able to see where this team ends up being. Strategic player management, balancing the needs of the squad, revenue maximization, making that money, cost controls, wage bills. We talked about Alexander Isak as well. Why Newcastle have taken a risk not to give him renew his contract just yet. He's got 3.5 years, but at the same time, he's probably thinking, "Hey, a whole lot of clubs want me as well." But there's a lot going in there. But you would like to be able to give Alexander Isak a real lucrative offer, because you've done well with this January in terms of selling players, reducing your wage bill, reducing the PSR situation, and then you can come to Alexander Isak and hopefully be in the Champions League too, and produce a very lucrative contract that can only encourage him to stay. I think so. If you're Paul Mitchell, if you're Yasser Al-Rumayyan, if you're Eddie Howe, or especially Paul Mitchell and Yasser Al-Rumayyan, you've got these things on your mind. So that's PSR, wage turnover, and stuff like that. Guys, I'm still, as you guys probably can tell the way I'm kind of explaining it and trying to say it, I'm still very much trying to work it out. It's taken me, but it was just been on my mind. I was trying to get into the mind of Paul Mitchell and others, and the owners to be able to understand. We're about to get to the player stuff, but before I do that, we've got a few comments here that be good to talk to the folks there. Geordie Z, you're doing a great job for not being an expert. Thank you, sir. It's a very complicated subject. Thank you, sir. I'm just, like I said, when I was making it, I almost said to myself, mate, just talk about the Bournemouth game before you mess it up. So, but that's, yeah, like, I hope it's helpful. Like, it's helping me to understand a little bit of things as well. I want players. I want to get our right wing forward. I want to get our right centre back. I want to get our goalkeeper. I think we're about 3, possibly 4 players away from being a title competitive team. I honestly believe that. I think so. I think we're 3 or 4 players away from that. But with the rules the way they are, it would do more harm than good if Newcastle spent 150 million pounds in January at this moment as well. So I can kind of, just researching it and seeing where things are, I can kind of see why Newcastle have been slower, much slower, and a lot more strategic in their approach. James Perch, I think it's my first time seeing you on here. Sorry, sir, if you've been here before, but welcome to the channel. I hope you're enjoying the show, and God bless you, sir. Newcastle's biggest problem is outplayed transfers or wages isn't even 150. I mean, is it outlay? Were you saying outlay? Isn't even 150 million. It's our money we've spent down to Eddie to get Europe and Silverstone to find top sponsors or be sacked. So Newcastle's biggest problem is outplayed transfers or wages isn't even 150 million pounds. It's our money we've spent down to Eddie to get Europe and Silverstone to top sponsors or be. So you're saying, I think you're saying, so yeah, so getting to the I think you're saying, James, correct me if I'm wrong, is if you get us into the competitions, we don't have to worry about this stuff so much. We can get the sponsorship deals and everything else. And I think if the people who created PSR, well, I don't know, there's an argument on that. I think that's what essentially, if Newcastle are regularly in the Champions League, I think this is what you're saying, James, and I agree with you to the point, is if Newcastle are regularly in the Champions League, this isn't such an issue. Like if you're in the Champions League, you're pretty much well covered in these instances. And I think that's where Newcastle need to be. But great question there. Tiger Studios, we need signings, bro. And I'm going to talk about that in the next section. I'm literally going to talk about that. I definitely, I think Eddie Howe's saying the same thing, and fans are saying the same thing. And finally, so I need a drink. George K, I can see a new stadium rather than extending the SJP. So can I. As the sponsorships and naming rights will be massive. I agree. And guys, I was planning, it's on my mind to have a show with folks, especially with folks that live in Newcastle, inside and outside, but people that live in Newcastle, because I want to talk about this new stadium stuff. I don't live in Newcastle. Obviously, you can hear from my accent. I'm not a Geordie. But I want to talk about this because I've been to the ground many times now, and I understand and talking to folks, and especially people that live in Newcastle, I know what it means, like where it is situated. Like it's literally, especially when you're walking down towards it, it's like you're walking to. Like, they can see why it's called the cathedral. It's like you're walking like to the cathedral type of thing, and everything. Like it's just amazing. Everything else. At the same time, though, as for instance, George Kaysen, I'm just saying, a new stadium, a new revenue, increasing stadium, increasing revenue. It not only does it kind of change the whole revenue stuff, increase our revenue, the stuff that we've talked about becomes a lot more easier, but also add status to Newcastle United as well. But is the cost too much in terms of St. James's Park? Is it not? I just want to have a show. I want to be able to talk about it as well. I feel because at the same time I've seen Newcastle fans from Newcastle who are actually for a new stadium and understand this. And I've seen obviously Newcastle from Newcastle who are saying they don't want to change that as well. So I want to be able to have a show about it. I want to be able to talk about it. So I want to see what your thoughts are on this as well, guys. And finally, I've got two more. James Perch. Oh, okay, outlaid. You said outlaid. You did say that outlaid. Yes, because we've shredded so many transfers like Leicester did. You end up having no money exactly, and Everton, but Leicester especially because they want, have to spend, and so our sponsors need more, and Europe has to be constant like Spurs did for. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. We need a constant. We need to be consistently in Europe, preferably Champions League. I agree with you, James. Uh, yeah, James, I thought I read you. It said James Philip. It's not about St James's Park. It's about income, and at St James's Park can't offer what a new stadium can. Sounds harsh, but fans can't have both. both, or tickets will uh, end up a grand this season if we don't. That's what I want to talk about. That's exactly what I want to talk about. That's exactly what I want to talk about. But great questions there, James. Great stuff. We're talking about players now. Like Tiger Studio says, we need signings, we need players. And I agree. I think Eddie Howe's saying this, like, as well, like, business knowledge is taking over football knowledge and stuff like that. So let me make sure you guys can see this on the screen. You can, but I need to maybe zoom in and zoom out a little bit. It feels like it's small on my screen, but I'll explain it if anything else. So players. This is like my workings out as well. Now I've zoomed out a little bit here. I feel sorry. Can you guys see it? Look, guys, let me know if you can see this enough. But because essentially what I'm trying to cover in this section is where I think the squad is out. It is at currently. So so obviously I've if you guys go from the top downwards, I've got attackers, midfielders, defenders, and obviously goalkeepers on the right. The grey areas of the unknowns is where we know as the squad is currently, where I think most fans, or a lot of the fans, will agree, where we need like the most significant improvements or upgrades, or even just replacements, which is obviously the right wing forward position, that right wing forward position, that grey bit next to Almir on there. Also the goalkeeping position. Dubravka's going to go, someone to succeed Pope as well, because that's what we need. We need to move forward with that. And also the defender part, the right centre back position, which is here. Obviously, someone to succeed Shaw as the squad is now, for instance. And we want to talk about the needs of the squad and what Newcastle need to do, or what Newcastle are trying to do. Now, on my right, it says squad details by position. This is from transfermarket.com. Now, Transfermarket, as you guys know, is quite conservative in terms of prices, in terms of transfer fees for players, and value for players, essentially. So, but it's a good estimate anyway. So essentially, there's a section on goalkeepers, defenders, midfield, and attack. So Newcastle's squad, they value Newcastle's squad overall in the ballpark of around 640 million euros. So our goalkeeping department's worth about 22 million euros, which is the bulk of it is Pope. So you can tell that we need another goalkeeper quite clearly. Our defender, for our defenders, that section is around 165 million. The average age, by the way, for our goalkeeper is 34 years. So we need a younger goalkeeper. Our defenders' average age is 28.4 years. We can and the market value is 165 million. Midfield average age is 25.3 years, which is where you want to be, I think. And a market value, which is the highest part, which is the most valued part of our team at the moment, is around 233 million. And our attack is at 218 million, with an average age of 27.4 years. So, as things stand, remembering all that we've talked about previously around revenue, PSR, wage to turnover, as things stand for this squad, in my opinion, and just observing what fans are saying, what journalists are saying, analysts are saying, where the key departments are in terms of when Newcastle could upgrade from, with the players that we have available. Obviously, Miggy's still here, but also I want to add, obviously, the great areas with the unknowns are where the parts we want to improve. So, like I said, right wing forward for attack, midfield, not midfield, defense, right centre back, and goalkeeper. Now, the other thing I wanted to add to this, and you guys would have seen, obviously, the players that are in the square mugshots of the players that I think are likely to play for Newcastle in the 25-26 season. And the players that are in a circle are players who, for instance, whose contracts are running out, are players who are likely to be possibly sold or likely to be sold and or possibly sold in January or the summer window. So I've included these players in the circle, and I've put these players in the circle to say that um, it is very much possible, whether in January or in the summer window, we not only have the current primary positions that we need to improve, i.e., right wing forward, goalkeeper, right centre back, but there will also need to be replacement players coming in for the players that are in circle. So, as Eddie Howe always points out, is if we sell a player, for the benefit of PSR, wage to turnover, or just sell a player anyway, they need to be replaced, and sometimes replacing them costs even more than what it is to sell them. So I want to be able to keep that in mind. So there's quite a few things I'm asking folks to kind of keep in mind of. I've also, and kind of to add to that, well, again, keeping PSR in mind, keeping wage turnover in mind, keeping in mind the squad needs and where the squad needs to improve and what we need to do. On the left-hand side, I've also put which is the average transfer fee of our attackers, our midfielders, and our defenders. And obviously, I've taken that average from what Transfer Market has valued our current crop of players at, and obviously divided it with the players that are currently there. So in our attack, we currently have, as it stands, Mickey hasn't been sold, so I've included him in this. We currently have 6 players. So I've divided what is our attack valued at. Our attack is valued at it's currently valued at 280 million. So I divided that 280 million at 36 million. Now I did this to get the average transfer fee as a kind of a reference point. This is just Philip's reference point. It might not be how you do it. It might not be how, a much more bigger, qualified expert will do it. What I think it will cost, for instance, to find that replace, even like a stand. This is an average transfer fee. So this isn't like top of the line, 60 million Tonali, 65 million Alexander Isak fee. This is just like a Premier League standard replacement fee. What it will cost to bring somebody either to replace or to maybe even be a floor raiser in the squad. So an average transfer fee for an attacker currently in the Newcastle squad is 36 million. So we need to buy someone either of that value or of that quality, or at least with the potential of reaching that value on that quality, if that makes sense. So for instance, and you're going to see in the next screen with, for instance, Patrick Mbeumo is currently kind of valued between 40 to 50 million pounds. He would go into our squad and pretty much be a standard in that squad in terms of coming in as well. But also, and you'll see me also add in terms of you see me talk about. So I'm trying to kind of build up a picture of how much it would cost to push this team forward, to make the squad even better, and hopefully be Champions League ready, be title contender ready, be trophy ready as well. So the average current cost of our attack is 36 million. The average cost of our midfield is 38 million for a player. So for a player has to be equivalent or have the potential to reach that quality. So for instance, I reckon maybe Lewis Miley probably fetch around between 25 to 35 million, or has the potential to. Maybe 20 million, 25 million. But I think he definitely has the potential. We all know from watching him, he has the potential to being a lot more higher than that, hence why he's there. So if that makes sense. And defenders that currently are the average market value of our defenders, where I think we need the most improvement, is 21 million. And obviously the goalkeeping department is in terms of improving, I think it needs significant improvement as well. So in my opinion, so for instance, in my opinion, as the squad stands, for instance, is if Newcastle were to in this January window, for instance, or the summer window, if they got a goalkeeper, an attacker, a midfielder, and a right centre back, the three positions, it could cost anywhere between 100 and 120 million, for instance. So keeping that in mind in terms of putting the squad forward, just to kind of, and that's just to maintain the standard of this. These are average prices, these are average values. This isn't, like I said, Isak 60, 70 million, what we bought him for, Tonali 45, 50 million prices. This is just, these are floor raisers. Mbembo, in my position, in my opinion, is a floor raiser rather than a ceiling raiser. I'm sure people will argue with that point. So that's just to keep the squad going, if that makes sense. That's just to keep the floor of the squad growing as well. So that, again, in itself raises different questions in terms of how, for the owners, if, again, another thing to add in terms of how they're going to push this, how they're going to push the squad forward, and the players they're likely to try and go for. So before I get into that, I didn't realize I got so many comments to go through. So I just wanted to lay that out. I wanted to lay that out to you guys, if that makes sense. Where this is just squad building, squad planning, how much it's going to cost. So there's the three primary position as a stand that we need to improve. But in order to make that happen and to be able to do it in a way where we're able to talk about keep within the rules of PSR, wage to turnover, sponsorship deals, Champions Leagues, revenues. There's a lot to consider here. You can see why this January transfer window is so slow at the moment. So before I get into that, in terms of how to improve it and how I think the type of players and the market value of players and the quality of players, the age of players and where they're coming from, how I think they'll go through, what Newcastle might aim for, the type of deals they might look for in January, for instance, or definitely in the summer, but as it stands in January, we'll be able to talk about that. So Jordy Z, again, I need some water. We've got more folks in here, guys. Welcome. You could have been anywhere in the world you're here today. Please do like, share, and subscribe. And guys, talk with me. Let me know. Engage. Let me know what you guys are thinking. Jordy Z, we definitely need a new stadium to be competitive. Hopefully it's in the Leazes Park, just up the road, so it can still be a cathedral on the hill. I'd love that, Jordy Z. And Jordy, I don't know if you can say, but if you can, let me know if you live in Newcastle, if you're Jordy Z. I'm sure you must be because it's just interesting for me to know if you can, or if you guys do send a comment about the stadium in particular, whether you go for a new stadium or not. Let me know if you're from Newcastle or not. Like I'm just it's just my curiosity. You don't have to do it, but do let me know if you live in Newcastle as well. James Perch, because in life, Fulham did it to make money. They doubled season tickets. They did to pay for these players. It's why Arsenal costs so much, because it offers them a top player season by charging $1 to $2 grand for it. Yep, exactly. And we want to be able, I think you're saying we want to be able to avoid that, isn't it? James Perch, would you take Rooney Bargy? He's back from his ACL soon. He's a top talent. I heard he's a top talent, James Perch. I haven't, usually before I make a judgment on a player, I like to read their scouting reports, watch them play. Like, so for instance, I watched Akliouche. I know quite a bit about Akliouche because I've watched him play about 6 or 7 times already. I know a bit about Jonathan David, and I know a bit more about Chevalier and others because I've watched Lille play. Fun team to watch play. But I don't know, and I haven't seen him enough to be able to make a judgment on him. But I hear very, very, I think he trains with Callum Wilson as well, doesn't he? So yeah, like any top talent would be great. James Perch, Philip, our squad carnage is 28 to 8 all around. I don't know if I understand what. Clarify that for me, James. Just clarify what that means. Got a few messages from you there. Philip, why can't we go Norway, Sweden, go get talent from South America? I'm fed up with top signings. Let's see Eddie earn his wage, develop young players between 18 to 21. I'm going to touch on that, James. I'm going to talk about that point in terms of top talent in a moment as well and see what you think. But very, very good point. I'm sorry, how does Salzburg build their team? They go find top talent, look at Ajax. they're about 12 million a year to make their scout and youth system top level. Well, that's what Newcastle want to do. We've had to take our academy. It's moved along a lot, but it needs a lot more improvement as well. And correct me, guys, if I'm wrong, but I need to do my history in this. But I don't know if it was under Kevin Keegan that we abandoned our academy at one point, didn't we? And that's why we lost out on Michael Carrick and others. Newcastle, just where it is and the great players it produced, should have one of the best academies in the land. But if I need to research that story and see see if that's the case. Jordy Z, Eddie Howe is the best manager in the league for improving players. You know what? I want to agree with you on that. I definitely agree with you on that one. George K, new signings, Vashtag Salia, yeah, joining the club at the end of the season. He was also wanted by Real Madrid. He's young but looks good. He looks hungry. He's very ambitious. I saw some of his interview. I said, this guy's got ambition in his eyes. James Perch, average age. Jordy Z. I mean Whitley. Okay, so you are a native, brought up in the Toon. So that's what I'm saying. This is good to hear. Like in terms of like for me to understand where things are at. Like it's clear to know because usually like I always, well not usually, but it's just good for me to know and to see where people are at. Appreciate you for letting me know, Jordy Z. And finally, George K. The council still owns the land on which SJP is situated and lease it to the club, so NUFC can not resell the land if they move. Okay, because I was thinking my kind of compromise or kind of way forward was say Newcastle moved to the Leazes Park and built a new stadium there. But then still keep St James's Park. The women's team can now take over it, but also we can convert parts of it into a museum, like Newcastle Museum as well, so you can still generate revenue and concerts as well, do concerts there, so it can be a revenue in itself, and for the football team, for the women's football team, and obviously as a museum and stuff like that. So the tradition of Newcastle is still there. Do you know what I mean? So that was my kind of thing, maybe going forward. But if the council own it, then it might not be able to something that we can do. Right. So before there's a few, I'm going to go back to this. So so I talked about the players, the current squad as it is, the free position. I think most of us will agree that we need to move forward to improve, but the average transfer fee of where I think it will cost to improve those positions, as well as taking in mind of the players that are likely to go either this January and also this summer, and how those positions will also need to be fulfilled, and what Newcastle are, what the strategy might be in terms of going forward and what we might need to do in order to do that. So, okay, I talked about Mbeumo, for instance. So Mbeumo, so to my left side, in terms of the players, the positions that we need to improve: right wing forward, right centre back, or who can probably play right back as well, and goalkeeper. There's two avenues that obviously that Newcastle have been kind of talking about improving, and one thing I think one is more favourable to what Eddie Howe wants to do, and one is more favourable to maybe what Paul Mitchell and the club want to do as well. Though I think it's not necessarily as divided that maybe it's more distinct rather than separated. So, for instance, say for instance Mbeumo, it's already been stated that he's at least one of our number one targets. He's going to cost between 40 to 50 million. So, great player. Good player. In my opinion, he's a floor raiser. He's not a ceiling raiser like a Alex Isak is, like a Bruno Gomes is, like a Botman is, in my opinion. He would cost between 40 to 50 million pounds, right? So if Newcastle go this route, it would have an almost instant effect on the squad, because obviously he's a Premier League certified player who would fill in that right wing position straight away. Having him and Jacob Murphy there, great. It would also have a ripple effect on the wage to turnover. He's going to want, he's currently on 50k at Brentford. He's going to want anywhere between 100k, a little bit more up as well, depending obviously how many clubs are in for him. I personally don't think that many clubs are in for him, but I might be wrong. Imagine he goes to Liverpool just this January. But I suspect, but cannot prove, that not all the top clubs are in for him. It's going to have ripple effect on our PSR, a ripple effect on our turnover. So great player, and there's also an impact. as opposed to, for instance, a more up and coming player like an Akliouche. Obviously, we've talked about him before. Also, right wing forward, plays for Monaco. Saw him play today. I've seen him play now 6 or 7 times now, like live now, which has been good to see him. Obviously, he's more of a potential, even at 22 years old. He would cost less. He's currently on about 20. He would cost around 20, 25 million euros, about 20, 25 million pounds. And his wages are considerably lower. He would cost us around 50k, more up and coming. So that these two routes that Newcastle can go. I can imagine Eddie Howe would prefer Mbeumo. He wouldn't mind the talent and the potential growth and outcome you can get from an Akliouche. But if you're a manager, a head coach like Eddie Howe is, and you want pretty much, if you can, instant impact on the squad, because there's pressures on you to get to Europe, preferably Champions League, you want an Mbeumo over an Akliouche. Because if you can imagine the likes of Anthony Gordon, Lewis Hall, Livramento, brilliant players right now. But guys, if you guys remember, it took between 6 months to a year for some of these players. 6 months to a year to get them to where they are now. And Akliouche could be, for instance, quite similar, although he's a little bit older, Champions League proven, it's a bit different to them. But, we're talking about these type of situations, these type of scenarios. And that's for the right, and again, similar for the right centre back. So I'm kind of giving the options of where Newcastle can go. Right, same thing for the right centre back position. Mark Gahey, currently valued anywhere between 40 to 50 million pounds, especially if you're going to get him in the transfer window. Again, impact on obviously on the PSR. He's currently on 50k according to FBref. He's going to want probably double that. He's a man in demand, so about 100k as well. Impact on wage to turnover. Instant impact on the squad. Our defense improves even more so. So you'll have going from left to right, Hall, Botman, Mark Gahey, Livramento. Beautiful. I love that lineup. And behind them, obviously, you would have Byrne, Kraft as it stands, Fabian Schär. So it would work for Newcastle, and instant impact, a lot of money. A ripple effect on the PSR, ripple effect on the wage turnover. The other way is get, for instance, a Juma Bar. And obviously, we're going to talk about Juma Bar because he came up as in relation to Man City. Looks like that deal's wrapped up for him. He's probably well, I said 10 million there, but I think he came up to 18 million. He's anywhere between 10 to 18 million. He's not on significantly less wages, but he's 17 to 18 years old. I've watched him play about 2 or 3 times as well. Very, very raw, but you can see the talent there. Huge guy, athletic guy, on point. Again, there's a thing I'm trying to kind of point out here, obviously, quite clearly. Again, similar to an Akliouche and Mbeumo, he would cost less impact on PSR, less impact on wage to turnover. But again, not a quick solution. Can take up to 6 months to a year going by Anthony Gordon, Livramento, and Hall and others, or not make it at all. If we got, I forgot the right back. If you guys remember the right back that we bought, I forgot his name. Young boy that we bought from West Ham. We bought him with 300k. I forgot his name, guys. I want to say Harry or Ashley Harris. Guys, remember him? Do you guys remember him? He's nowhere to be seen. That could be Juma Bar, that could be a Akliouche. That's the risk that you take. That's why you pay less money for these guys. Similar thing for the goalkeeping department. James Trafford. Now, James Trafford is now looking at 10 to 12 million. But obviously, he's got that real experience now. His real personality as well. Talked about him. As opposed to Chevalier as well. They're about the same age as well. It's a bit different in the goalkeeping department. There's a lot more going on. But Chevalier is currently valued at twice the amount. And to be fair, actually, the goalkeeping department, they kind of earn the same money, so it's not as significant. So I've put to the right side of my screen. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. If you add all these things up, if you add all these things up, if Newcastle take the route of we want instant impact on the playing field, essentially plug and play players. Like it's not going to take 6 months to a year to develop them like a Livramento, like a Hall, like a Gordon. We want Mbeumo, Gahey, Trafford in the squad right now, you know, as it stands, would instantly impact, will have instant impact on the team from a peer from a transfer fee situation, for instance. I'll kind of it would cost us between about 112, 110, 120 million pounds. Again, think about PSR, for instance, where we're at. I don't want to be doing it, but that's just that's the ripple effect. And then if you look at the wages, for instance, what these guys would cost in wages, for instance, we've got 200Ks and then, kind of 70Ks, about 270K combined. I don't even know what that would be, for instance, on a monthly and a yearly wage. What would that be actually? 250K. Say it's round up to 250K, 1 million, no, 500,000, 1 million per week. No, 250K per week. 1 million, 2 million per month, maybe 20. I don't know how much that will cost, for instance, for a year. Again, but huge impact on the wage turnover. If we want to go to the Champions League, for instance, do we have even enough room? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's this kind of tension between how between kind of paying for the quality and experience of players that are already there, in terms of that are good to go, plug and play, floor raisers, potential ceiling raisers, to players that are a little bit more raw, gems outside the market, but are value, but are lower risk in terms of financial burden on Newcastle United. And that's where I think there is that thing between with Eddie Howe and with Paul Mitchell. And I think that's where PIF, Yasser Al-Romayan, is going to have to be able to find the balance of where the squad is going to go. So I wanted to kind of put that forward to you guys to see where things are at. And I haven't even, so that's just the three positions that I think most people, like I said, we need to improve. I focused on the right wing forward position, the right centre back position, the goalkeeping position. That's just that. I haven't included, which is what is on the next screen, the positions I talked about of the players I think are going to leave this January transfer window, either this January transfer window or the summer window. And that is obviously and we're going to have to find replacement for these guys. If Harvey Barnes goes, Miguel Almiron is obviously looking like he's going to leave in January. I think Barnes will probably might leave in the summer window. Callum Wilson's going to probably leave in the summer. Lloyd Kelly might leave this January, though I think he'll probably be in the transfer window. Target's going to go. Longstaff's going to go. So that's a left wing position gone, another right wing position gone, a centre forward gone, a left centre back gone, a midfielder gone, another left back gone. Newcastle are going to have to replace these guys. I think they're likely to be replaced by versatile players, youth players. Probably, if you're looking at Barnes and Almiron going, you're probably looking for a young talent in Europe, anywhere between 10 to 15 to 25 million, who can play across the front three. And a similar thing with the defense part and the midfield part. But this is the type of thing that Newcastle are having to look at, I think, in terms of the squad building and kind of going forward for themselves. So I wanted to be able to add that before I conclude things and kind of put that out there to you guys. We talked about the financial side in terms of wage to turnover, what PSR is, the impact for the squad, where I think Newcastle might be in terms of how much headroom they've got, and why selling this January is so important. At the same time, trying to balance that with the actual squad as well, the team that's on the field and is there. And I'm going to give my conclusion in the moment in terms of where I think essentially what they're trying to do. I think they may take the risk of selling Miguel Almiron, maybe selling another one or two players, possibly. And if they can, wait for players to come back for injury and hope that they can get into the Champions League with the squad they currently have. If a player, i.e., a Mark Gahey or someone in the right wing forward, but Tyler Diblin, sorry, for instance, or probably not even Tyler Diblin, and then Mbeumo become available, they may risk it. But I think the real aim is for this summer is to try and risk it with the squad they have currently, because there's just so much to change with the three positions they need to upgrade, but also with the players that are going to leave, trying to find what I think will be young talent around the country as well as in Europe and around the world to be able to replace them. So there's a lot going on, I think, for Newcastle United. I'm going to read your comments, guys. It's midnight, so I'm going to let you guys go soon. I'm going to read your comments and get where you go. Philip, sorry, James, let me drink some water. And thank you to all the guys that are here, that have been here from the beginning to the end, even now, whenever you joined. James Perch, Philip, I love your vids. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Can I ask you, how come fans don't complain how we've only signed one talent all year? Someone isn't doing their job, or Wolves and Boys Club was Carrick-Shearer? How comes don't complain about how we've only signed one talent all year? I think fans are complaining about us not signing players. I think if for me, for instance, if I'm taking a broader look, and I did a transfer show about this as well, and I think Paul Mitchell was right. Our transfer strategy wasn't fit for purpose, not in terms of the talent that we brought in and the profile of players, because I think we've done really well in that, but in terms of not selling players. And we're still trying to make up for not being good at selling previously and the damage that caused, and trying to essentially reset things. Like I said, essentially, if we sell if we sell Barnes, Kieran Trippier, Longstaff, for instance, as well as the other players that are probably whose contracts are gonna go down, it's gonna have a significant impact on our PSR and our wage to turnover, and give us a lot more space to buy players. But we're gonna miss a lot of depth and a lot of experience. So Newcastle, I think Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, Yasser Al-Rumayyan have a big, big job, especially the next two transfer windows, including this one, January and summer, to see where Newcastle are at. And there's just a lot of things, a lot of spinning plates at the moment as well. Sponsorship deals, the ground, the new CEO, and the new UEFA rules coming in, where Newcastle have to be very careful how they maneuver, in my opinion. James Perch, Keegan disbanded us at under 21s in the 90s. So that did happen. Yeah. So, and we're paying the cost for that now. If you look at Chelsea's academy players, Man City, Southampton beat us the other. Was it Southampton that beat us the other day? We're so far behind, guys. We're so far behind. We've improved, but compared to those guys, yeah, we're behind. We're behind. I watched Liverpool today. They had Kwanzaa playing, Harvey Elliott playing. I'm sure there was somebody, Bradley playing. So that's just free academy players. That's really quality. So they've, in my book, they've probably saved anywhere between 80 to 150 million pounds just by building their academy. Whereas we're just trying to get to that stage at the moment. So even if Liverpool decided to sell those free academy players, how much money they're going to make as well. So we're still quite off it. There's just so much that we need to build and develop. But I think we can do it, and I think we will do it. George K. Oh, sorry, I missed that. I missed the one part here. James Perch, if Newcastle moved to Leisures Park, James Park will go back to Parkland. Okay, it'll go back to Parkland. Okay. Thank you for that, James. George K. Remember, apparently we were willing to pay close to 68 million for Gahey, and it was rejected. The money is there for the right player, or is it? I think that money. I don't think we're going to pay 68 million. I think that's what Crystal Palace wanted. My understanding from listening to journalists, and I agree with it. I think Newcastle willing to pay 50 million. I think that's the money that's still available. I think they'll still be willing to pay that this January to avoid the summer bidding war with other clubs. So I think it's 50 million. And as Eddie Howe described it, and by doing this research, I understand it more and more now. It's not that they've now got that 50 million in the pot and they're ready to spend it. I think in that moment, in that time, if they bought Mark Gahey for 50, 60 million, they probably would have sold Longstaff. They probably would have sold maybe even Barnes in order to accommodate that, just to take off their wages and to deal with PSR. Now that it's January, now that we're in a different situation altogether, Newcastle are 5th in the league, with 6th in the league, potential to get to the Champions League. That pot of money isn't available like that because of the impact and the ripple effects that it would have. If we bought Mark Gahey now for 100k, for 50, even for 40 million, 100k in wages, the ripple effect that would have on PSR, without selling any players, the ripple effect that would have on PSR, on wage turnover, will be significant, and that will put us at a big disadvantage going into the summer. And other teams will know that, especially when it comes to trying to buy players from us as well. So I think it would have to be a special type of deal to get Mark Gahey, for instance. If we're just speaking about Mark Gahey or a player of that ilk, of that type, if Mark Gahey is available for 40 million on a loan with an obligation to buy, where we can buy after that June date, for instance, that could be something that Newcastle may look to. But then you'll probably see a Lloyd Kelly definitely go to Juventus for about 15 to 20 million, if you follow what I'm saying. So that's my kind of thoughts around it. But great question though, George K. James Perch, who is the winger you're on about, Philip? Because I've heard a lot checking rumors now. He's crap, and I'm a Leon fan. Benrahma is playing better than him. Oh, he's from Monaco. He's all right though. I like Akliush, to be honest. I like Akliush. Have a read about some scout reports on him. It's a bit mixed, but I don't mind him. That's what I'm saying. It's a risk. And I'm not kind of hung on one player or not. Like, whoever improves Newcastle and gets us to a team that can win titles, like, I'm cool. If it's Benrahma, Akliush, great. Bring them, whoever it is. James Perch, Gahey ain't coming here. Sorry, mate. He's a dud. Okay, I disagree that he's a dud. You want Champions League? You buy young stars from the Botman, Bruno, Isak, Tonali, all Champions League proven. We can't buy bottom feeder clubs. We can't, but if we take, for instance, Cassano, Juma Bar, for examples, even Man City have just bought them. And Man City have bought Cassano for 40 million when he wasn't worth 40 million. If we can see those players, other clubs, especially top clubs who are in better positions than us, can see them, and it puts us in a situation. Thanks guys, Ashby. That's it, Harrison Ashby. So we can buy these top talents, and they could end up being like, and I don't mean like this, but it could be an Ashby situation. So that's the risk. George K, James McAtee, and Tyler Diblin fit Eddie's profile. Yeah, they are. And I think McAtee might be going to RB Leipzig, for instance, or Dortmund. So, do you know what I mean? So it's, even for the young talent, it's a big competition. James Perch, we after Japan's keeper Suzuki. There's a couple: Chevalier, Suzuki, Trafford, couple guys. I'm with Ashworth. Eddie Howe need to learn. He is not a top manager. I'm sorry. When he can say he will bankrupt us with a selfishness. Mitchell is here to build us. He's not an enemy. I don't think anybody is. I think there's a balance to be struck between Mitchell, Eddie Howe, and the club. I think the club can see the incredible value that Eddie Howe adds. I think Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell need each other. Paul Mitchell is incredible recruitment players and building a sound transfer strategy, but he's never been at a club where that has actually won major honours. And I think the reason for that is that he needs an Eddie Howe who is able to build a culture in the club as well. So I think they need each other. And Eddie Howe hasn't never really worked with a Paul Mitchell type of character either. And I think they need each other, to be honest. Look at Spurs, young centre midfielder, 12 million. He's a beast. Now we can't go find young talent more. I don't think Eddie Howe wants to develop you. He does. He just developed Hall, Livramento, Gordon. Like, He's now doing a solo as well. I think he's there. Yeah. So guys, I'm going to round it off. I'm going to close it off now. The conclusion is for me at the moment is there's just so many variables in this PSR and soon to be wage to turnover period. In terms of for Newcastle United, just from a financial perspective looking forward, but also revenue wise, how Newcastle improve their revenue, the new stadium sponsorship deals, which are going to be again linked to Newcastle's performance on the pitch. Can they get to the Champions League, or are they going to be in the Conference League? That will also have a ripple effect on the sponsorship deals that they'll have. That'll have a ripple effect on how they have what kind of type of conversation they have with your Alexander Isaks and your Bruno Gomes, who I'm sure will be more interested in playing in Champions League rather than Europa Conference League. So those are the things that they've got to keep in mind. Also, the squad as it is developing now, we know the places, the areas as the team stands now, we want to improve. Right wing forward, goalkeeper, right centre back. I haven't even mentioned maybe even another attacker because of Wilson's injury, but just those positions in itself, it's going to cost Newcastle, depending on where they want to go. How do they want to do it? Do they want to, do they find, do they go, proven players, center, for instance, that are ready to go? They're going to cost money. They're going to cost anywhere between 100 million to 120 million as it stands. And that's just for floor raisers, not necessarily potential ceiling raisers. Are they going to go for a youth, your Akliushas and your Juma Bar type of players who are going to cost a little bit less, but might take a little bit more to improve over time? Or are they going to get a mix of both? That's just for the three positions. What about for the positions of the players whose contracts are going to run out, like your Callum Wilsons and others? But also for the players that you might have to sell in order to have an impact on the PSR and on the wage turnover. Like I mentioned, your Longstaff, your Kieran Trippiers, and your Harvey Barneses will have a significant impact on our PSR and our wage turnover bill, and I think will almost reset us, added to the revenue that we might get as well, in terms of, to the point of when Newcastle were first taken over, and give us that opportunity. But again, we miss the depth, we miss the skill, we miss the experience that those players bring. So there's a lot for Newcastle to manage. And I think this January transfer window, although I want to see a star coming into Newcastle. I want to see that right wing forward position filled as well. But I can see, and I want a player that I know would help us improve our chances dramatically in terms of getting the Champions League spot. And I think they'll be considering that. But finding the balance of finding that talent for the right price, who will not hurt us too much going into the summer, is a very, very, very difficult task. And there's a lot of spinning plates. And I'm still learning about this, guys. But I think at this moment in time, Eddie Howe, the owners, the Paul Mitchell are making the right strategic approach, which is taking their time, being patient, and not making sure that don't pay over the odds for any players. So that could mean we don't get into the Champions League, and that could mean that Alexander Isak, Bruno Gomes, for instance, or the players I'm really looking at this summer, may have really different conversations with Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell. I think we might have to be brave and say, that's okay. If they want to go, we'll sell them. Hopefully not to anybody in the Premier League, but abroad, and we'll make our money. And that changes our whole outlook differently in terms of PSR, in terms of wage turnover. And we kind of start with the players that we've got and kind of almost do a reset totally. I think this is a summer not only that we're getting our ducks in a row in terms of sponsorship deals, the stadium, the squad itself, but I also think that Newcastle United as a squad, the team, but also as a club, the stadium, everything else, the new CEO, the structure is going through a realignment. The ideal scenario is we have a successful January transfer window selling players that get us ready for the summer, and we go with the players that we have. Harvey Barnes returns from injury, stays injury free. Callum Wilson too, Kraft, Lascelles, and they all help us get into the Champions League. And that would really, really help us. Either way, I'm going to still support the club. I'm backing the movements that they're making. Eddie Howe, Paul Mitchell, Yasser Al-Rumayyan. I'm sure you guys are too. But this show has been incredible to be with you guys. The amount of people, the comments that have come, I really, 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 really appreciate you guys. Just got one more comment here from James Perch. Before you go, if we do sell, we have to sign 2 first-team players, 3 future stars, and set a system that makes a turnover of teams that can compete. I appreciate you for that, James. As well, I think it will cost a lot. I don't think we can do that in January, James. Just based on the stuff that I've talked about, I think that'll be something for the summer. But I'd love that. I'd love that to be able to happen in January, guys. I appreciate you so much. Like I said, it's always a blessing being with you guys. I hope you guys enjoy the show, and I've learned so much about today. Just studying this stuff, and I've learned so much from you guys as well. Make sure you have a good evening, whatever you're doing. Be well, and as always, folks, take care and God bless.